Welcome to the Byte Pod. Today we have Tarek Kara, Byte co-founder and CEO. Tarek is an innovator in trade data analytics and screening technology. His career spans regulatory technology and government collaboration. Tarek, great to have you on, as always.
Thanks, Anne. Great to be on, and I'm super excited for our guest today.
Yeah, and we have Kyle Grobler. It's great to see you again, Kyle. Kyle is a seasoned professional in logistics and trade compliance. He's currently based in Ireland and brings to us today a wealth of experience in navigating the complex landscape of international trade regulations across many countries and continents. So today we're excited to have Kyle share his lessons learned and predictions for the industry. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and thanks, Tariq, for having me. Looking forward to having this conversation with you guys.
So before we move on, I just want to take a moment to describe the Byte platform. So Byte is a screening platform designed to streamline compliance and risk management by providing access to comprehensive data sets on high-risk entities, commodities, and trade compliance regulations. Using advanced AI-driven insights, Byte enhances decision-making for businesses across various industries, from manufacturing to importers and exporters and financial institutions. The platform offers a seamless integration with popular tools, ensuring efficient and accurate screening. So with that, we will jump into our conversation today. So just to kick us off, Kyle, can you share just a little bit about your background, how you got involved in trade compliance, and kind of how you ended up here
Definitely.
today?
Yeah, 100%. Again, extending my thanks to you both for having me again. Looking forward to the conversation. Um, like most people in trade, we didn't choose this line of work, or at least I didn't, right? I tripped and fell into it, and I've been falling ever since. Um, Initially, I started my background and my career in logistics for a freight forwarding company, a small freight forwarding, a mom and pop shop in South Africa, where I had firsthand experience on commodities in general. So the importance of receiving cargo, the condition of the cargo, the packaging of the cargo, the way of receipts regarding, is it coming in an FCL? Is it coming in an LCL? Is it a front loader, a side loader? So learning all these nuances that if you aren't part of the world, you really have no idea about, right? And so getting engrossed in that, working for some very high retail end customers within South Africa and the South African region, um, my career quickly and swiftly moved on into the office. And I say the office like not the comedy, the office, right? The office, where all the stuff happens. And I started opening files for our customers and understanding the importance of weightables, weights, things of that nature, the commodity, the client, the reference numbers. And it just went from strength to strength and really, really quickly. My career, when I look back, it accelerated really fast. From working in the warehouse to the layout of the cargo to streamlining processes and procedures in that space to going into the office, opening files, and then doing the customs entries. And that's really where it started. And to give you guys a bit of background, everyone's familiar with the Matrix. And for those of you that aren't, you can look for it after this. But my first customs entry was done on some software. I don't even know what it's called. It was similar to the Matrix. It was a black and green screen. So just black and green, just like those numbers going around. And the gentleman, I even remember he was actually smoking in the office. And that's back when I don't think you could smoke in the office, but he was smoking anyway. And he was telling me, like, oh no, I have to press this button to go to this next window and this next window and this next window and this next window. I was like, you're just telling me to do this without giving me any like conceptual understanding. This is why the importer's number is important in this block, and this is why the exporter is used in this space, and this is the reason why we're capturing this data. It's just like do this and do this and do this. So anyway, great mentor. I'll give him a reference for this afterwards. And yeah, so it went from there, and then commodity codes and that system. You'll get to the end of the system, and only at the end you would know if your entry was done correctly. And oftentimes when you start out, you're not too sure if you're doing it correctly, and you get all the way to the end and it would say reject declarer. So you would spend 15, 20, 25 minutes processing an entry, let's say 10 or 15 lines, and get to the end. But when you got rejected, it wouldn't tell you what the error was. So frustrating. I'm so I feel so privileged today that when brokers and customs agents do entries, like it tells them the error, right? There's a discrepancy here. And I think we're living in a very privileged world, and also goes to show the technology advancements that we have made in the space. So working for a small freight forwarding company, moving all different types of commodities, that's when I also got heavily engrossed in to helping our customers, our importers, understand compliance, because there was a big gap between businesses bringing in goods and the knowledge that needed to make it more effective and more efficient and compliant. I would go to customs meetings on my own accord outside of hours, meet with customs officials to understand what is their perception, what are they looking for, what makes them tick, what are the markers, what are their requirements, and then looking at our imports and saying, well, I understand what these requirements are, let's try weave them in so they can work together. So then I started setting up a bonded warehouse. I started understanding the importance of free trade agreements because we're moving goods within Africa, and understanding that, a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, struggle with cash flow. These aren't multinational, these are mom and pop shops that like every penny counts. And sometimes that means by saving the pennies, the business is able to continue going, and families are able to live, right? So I really took it personally. I was like, what can I do to make this business remain in business and profitable? And that's when I started going through these customs procedures, like simplified procedures, documents like carnets, free trade agreements, bonded warehouses, movement in bonds, and really educating our customers on these procedures that can have a massive financial impact. And that way they also don't have to pass the extra cost on to their customers. So it had this knock-on effect. And I've always felt that I've always wanted to help people or help companies. And I've never really understood, what that looks like. But now today, looking back, I think I possess a skill that can help companies and help people. And that's really what I try to do. I really have an invested interest in companies and people and businesses when helping them. And then working for that freight forwarding company, I moved to a different freight forwarding company where they focus mainly on ocean imports and a lot of the Far East. I helped, again, our customers, the importers at the time, with their contracts with these suppliers. And oftentimes there was things missing, like, for example, Incoterms, for example, change of ownerships. And these are things that we don't even think that matter, but they really, really matter. Like when it comes to like litigation, if these things aren't in the contract, like you're in for a rude awakening. And again, the fundamental piece from career to career is it's been an educational piece. There's always that educational piece that's missing. With classification is another one. So, importers were importing goods under commodity codes that their suppliers gave to them. And I was like, well, hang on a second. When you refer to this, it makes no sense. It's a balloon, but you're importing a tire, right? And to give you a funny example. And when you dive deeper into these nuances and understanding that they play not only a compliance role, but also a financial role, the companies can really benefit. Then I moved over to Ireland in 2018. So all this other history here was all based on South Africa and international trade. And granted, we were moving goods between, the USA, the Middle East, Africa, Europe. Then I immigrated to Ireland in 2018, where I worked for a manufacturing company. And that's when I really got exposed to how the manufacturing process works. And I led their logistics and trade compliance, and understanding that, all the different components put together. Now we're changing origin and how this affects origin and how it affects preferential trade. Although I had past experience with this, it gave me a first-hand, on the floor, seeing it perspective. And then also working with other stakeholders within the business and educating them on the importance of logistics and trade. And again, it's that education piece that's been a common reoccurring factor that's always missing. Working for them and streamline a lot of their processes and procedures, help them, made some pretty significant financial gains, which obviously makes the stakeholders happy. But again, I always tell people that my job and my priority is to make sure that we're compliant, because the cost of non-compliance can be crippling. And if we can get an added bonus of saving some money, generating some more revenue, that's just an added bonus. And if we can get that, like, that's all great. But mitigating risks and securing the business from going under or other litigation is my top priority. And then I moved to another startup company where it reminds me of Wolf of Wall Street, right? Where everything's absolutely crazy, where you can't believe it. It was very, very exciting, very, very fast paced. We had some of the best minds, I would say, probably in the world working for the company. People from Google, Meta, Facebook, you name it, they all work there in some capacity. That gave me some great exposure to the world. My role there was North America, South America, the whole entire Europe, Middle East, South Asia, ANZ. And again, that also gave me exposure to global trade and logistics on a much larger scale because I was responsible for all of those entities across the world. And getting more familiar with how companies can benefit with GSTs, right? So if people don't know what GST is, it's VAT. It's VAT paid on imports. And for us in South Africa, and Europe and the UK, GST is a very foreign word for us. It's normally VAT. So understanding that, by having a GST deferral account, you don't have to pay these upfront. Again, that's a cash flow thing. So improving cash flow globally, understanding that no matter what country you're in, there's always rules and regulations that we have to adapt to. And the ability to adapt is what makes us more effective, as opposed to the knee-jerk reaction. We need to understand that no matter what commodity that we're moving or where we're moving it to, there's always going to be a set of rules, complexities. But by understanding that and being in a position to combat that, we can be at the forefront as opposed to being reactive and being like we're unaware. And it's always about staying informed and asking the questions and never being afraid to say, hey, by the way, I don't know this. I don't know this. Hey, and can you help me? Can you support me? And showing that vulnerability and understanding is really where the growth happens. And it's part and parcel why I believe I've been able to help transform, some of the companies I've worked for alongside my colleagues who have been very, very supportive along the way. And then I joined a leading manufacturing company after that for Ireland and leading our EMEA region, where again, new complexities, new rules, new regulations, the medical sector, which is very complex, very competitive. And then just taking it from strength to strength there and understanding that, to my point earlier, the nuances behind certain commodities and certain products come at certain rules and regulations, and the ability to adapt and be proactive in your approach, leaning against your stakeholders and with your stakeholders and aligning the goals together to make a collaborative approach. And then you tend to see the benefits.
Yeah, that's super. And you've touched on a lot of points that are close to our hearts as well. Supporting the mom and pop, supporting the tech
Right.
companies, training as well, education, things like that. So yeah, that's fantastic. And so Kyle, kind of looking at where things are now, what are just a couple of lessons you've learned or situations where you feel like you know, this is something I've learned from maybe a gap and a learning lesson, things like
Yeah,
that you've come across in trade compliance.
great question. My number one problem that I've seen at every single organization, importer and exporter, supplier, manufacturer, is documentation. So every time I go in and I assess and we look at things, I always say first place to start is documentation. This is something that's completely overlooked, and I get the impression that people think it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. It's a piece of paper. It has a name on it. It has a currency, but this is often not the case. We need to go back to the basics of commercial invoices, certificates of origin, certificates of conformity. When we're able to identify the gaps in our documentation, the knock-on effect can be absolutely profound. Because now you're not sucking away from your resources and trying to get the data. For example, is the currency correct? Is the SKU correct? Is the description correct? Is the PO placed against this correct? Do I have the correct documentation? So these small things that we might take for granted, I think I did a calculation. On average, if a certain piece of information is missing, the best turnaround time is typically about 24 hours. And this is an average. I took a bunch of data and put those numbers together. So it takes 24 hours turnaround time. It's the broker's time, it's the buyer's time or the purchasing team's time, it's the analyst's time, it's my time, it's the other manager's time. So 6 or 7 people are typically involved when a simple piece of information is missing from a documentation. So I urge importers, exporters, suppliers to review their documentation, collaborate with the importer or the purchaser and say, hey, what do you require in order for us to maintain our business, to maintain it to be streamlined and profitable. Because every time information is missing, I'm going to mold a point here, is if there's a cost to the company, as in resources, there's also a financial burden, and then it's also risking the compliance, right? So if we can start as simple as outlining the requirements on our documentation, the profound impact that that has is, it's not even measurable. That's the profound impact, especially if you're importing 4, 5,000, 6,000 shipments a month or a year, right? So those little things can definitely add up. And that's, for me, has been absolutely fundamental. We miss the fundamentals, but documentation is definitely a place that I can confidently say, if you start there, the benefits that you will see will be unprecedented.
Yeah, thank you. And just kind of going off of that, like, what would you say to people who say, like, it's too complex, it's too time consuming, or trade compliance is not affordable? You know, we can't afford, you know, all of this stuff to implement all of this, or we can't afford these people.
Yeah, so that is a great question, and it's a question I've also thought about quite often. Being in the space and seeing companies that have that, or I ask myself, why don't they have it? And it's probably an affordability piece, or just a lack of expertise and knowledge and experience. I think there's several tools. First and foremost, there are a lot of companies out there, software companies, that you can work with that can help, bridge that gap. There's a lot of trade professionals out there that will give you the knowledge. I mean, LinkedIn is a great place to start. Google, right? If you go to revenue, you can go to revenue websites and the CBP and see what requirements are. Yes, it's an additional bit of work, but nothing good ever comes easy. And I mean, that's like a topic of life, and not to get super philosophical. But you have to do the work. And I encourage, get uncomfortable being uncomfortable, because it's going to have a benefit. Ask trade compliance professionals. I get asked quite often, how do I manage this, or how do I do that? And I'm more than willing to help, right? And again, it's just about sharing knowledge and going to the websites. I mean, there's tons of YouTube videos out there that the government agencies really try and help the importer. There's webinars, there's seminars, and I would encourage, mom and pop shops to engage in those. And then, I don't know if I already said this, but there are trade professionals out there that do pro bono work. So you can say, hey, look, I don't have the money to give you, but if you can show me the cost benefit that you can have, then we can work out a fee. So, I mean, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. And I would always start, I'm a learner. So I love, diving in the deep hole, going down Google, going down revenue, watching webinars, speaking to other professionals, and just sharing knowledge, and eventually getting to, my own conclusion. But there's definitely a wealth of knowledge out there, and if people aren't familiar with it, I mean, start with YouTube or Google, which is probably maybe a controversial take, but if you have absolutely no money and you have absolutely no guidance, I mean, CBP has tons of videos on YouTube. Revenue has tons of revenue. When I'm saying revenue, Irish Revenue has a ton of YouTube videos. The UK government has it as well. And then LinkedIn's also a great place to network and start and just ask the question. It's a very helpful community.
And ChatGPT, of course, we can't
Well,
forget
yeah,
about.
if you want to ask ChatGPT as well, or even better yet, Perplexity, if you guys haven't heard of it.
I haven't. Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, segue to AI and stuff. What's your view on artificial intelligence and using tools like that, and how do you view that?
Yeah, great question. So we obviously, for the viewers and listeners, we had a pre-chat before this recording, and my view is, I'll use the tractor analogy that I shared with you both. When the tractor was invented, people were scared that they were going to lose their jobs. And ultimately, some of them did lose their jobs. But now the farmer had more time to make sure his chickens were healthy, right? Fix the hole in the fence so the foxes didn't get it. And the other workers built roads and infrastructure, right? And that's why we were able to sit and have this conversation today. And like that, I believe that AI and where we're going, the trend is our friend. We need to ride the trend. We need to harness the trend, use it to make sure that we're making effective decision making. We can make effective decision making in a split second, and we're able to do the other more nuanced things with our lives. Stakeholder engagement, right? I don't think AI is at the point where we can make stakeholder engagements and build the relationships with finance, with HR, with operations. Definitely a tool to be leveraged. If people are cautious or precautious, I would say take it with a pinch of salt. try it, leverage it, use it to your ability, use it within your realm. And I would encourage companies, people to use it. And I also believe that if you don't use it, you will probably be left behind, because there's not a company out there right now that isn't throwing millions, if not billions of dollars at AI, because they see the benefit that it has.
Yeah, I liked when we were talking before too, like the tractor, and then you also gave the calculator example. And I've been thinking about that, like, when you're in school and you're not allowed to use a calculator on your exam because you need to learn how to do the math, but like now everyone has a calculator in their pocket at all times on their phone. So it's kind of like,
Right.
let's teach people how to use that tool. So yeah, I like,
100%.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like, not to beat a dead horses, as they say, but then we would also say, like, well, then why do we have computers? It makes our life easier. We're more effective with the computer. We're more efficient with the computer. So let's use that same knowledge. With AI, we'll be more effective, more efficient. And I think that's, really case in point.
Yeah, and just in addition to AI, like, do you have any other insights into where you see trade compliance as an industry going?
Yeah, I if we can get a general consensus, I believe that trade compliance, although it gets more complex year in and year out with new rules and regulations, by leveraging these tools, I am confident that our compliance risk will drastically decrease, because the AI will be able to support all the machine learning, all the programs, or the software will be able to identify gaps before they happen. Let importers, exporters know, hey, by the way, you're missing documentation. You're ordering goods from a known entity that you shouldn't be doing. And I mean, it seems crystal clear to me, and I'm open to your guys' feedback, that risk should ultimately be going down, and penalties should be something of the past. That's not to say that they won't happen. That's not to say that we're not there yet. Definitely not there yet. But I would say, if we continue with this trajectory, fines, penalties, fines and penalties should become less and less and less. Compliance should drastically increase, because we're leveraging these tools. There's no more human error. It's not open to interpretation. There are mechanisms. There is a function behind it. There's a rationale behind it, and you have the evidence, right, to back it up. So for me, it's very, very exciting. How much longer will I have a job? I mean, don't ask me that question. I'm not a mind reader, and I don't have the magic ball. But as for now, as long as I can leverage these tools, and again, to my point earlier, focus on other assets of the business, supplier relationships, etc., there will always be a need and a want for the software, like the tractor, and for us to coexist.
Yeah, no, that's great take, and definitely along the lines that we see as well. And I think with the tools that are coming out, with the technology, an analogy we also like to use is that when you in the US, we used to have cable TV, right? And
Right.
you had
Yeah.
one way to go get it. Now you've
Yeah.
got streaming, you've got Hulu, Netflix, stuff like that. I
100%.
think people, any type of user is going to be comfortable with multiple different tools, in their toolbox. And yeah, I do think that that's going to kind of be the standard in the industry. But curious as well, kind of digging into maybe a slightly more niche area. Um, what's your take on, best ways for companies, kind of giving our listeners tips and tricks and stuff like that. Things like HTS classification, or, getting the right, I think in the EU they have combined nomenclature, things like that. So, what's your take on what are methods, what are tools or tips people can use to get, classification right and compliance in many ways?
Yeah. Yeah. So for classification is something that's extremely nuanced, and it's super. There's also bias. There's definitely bias. Um, I know, speaking to you guys earlier, you can have 100 trade professionals in a room from various regions around the world classifying. I'm not talking about apples and oranges, complex items, and you'll be lucky if you get half of the room to confirm your classification. And I know this is not really answering your question directly with classification. Um, Classification is the dark arts. If you ever see any of my comments on classification on LinkedIn, I always say it's the dark arts. Um, yeah, classification is something that is extremely meticulous. It can be extremely detrimental to the business from a financial impact and from a non-compliance impact. There's no straightforward answer. It does take work, and ultimately, if there are tools, I would try leverage them, to your ability. If that's something that you don't have that capacity for, I know that there are classification AI tools out there. I haven't had a lot of dealing with them directly, but I'm pretty old school when it comes to classification. I spend a couple of days, looking at an item, going on cross-referencing BTIs, binding tariff information for our listeners if they don't know. These are government rulings that are set in stone for, I believe the period is 2 or 3 years, 2 years and 3 years, you know, two, two, two,
I'll
3 years.
defer to you on that one.
Um, yeah, I've just lost my job and my credibility. Um, no, so that is a government ruling, and like that, it does take quite a while. For apples and oranges is quite straightforward. For the more complex items, it does unfortunately take time, and there's no straightforward answer. From a compliance aspect, I would say, data is your friend, and whether you have, if you just need data, right? The data can be not the best data, but if you have some sort of data that you can analyze and you can see, okay, well, how I would do it is I always go from like, what is the biggest commodity, or what's the biggest number, right? So you want to see, okay, what goods am I importing that has the highest value? And then I'll look at those first. Okay, am I classifying correctly? Am I using the correct procedure code? Is my documentation correctly? Do I understand the licensing compliances with this commodity? Because the highest one is obviously going to have the most detrimental impact on the business. And same for the export. So typically what I would do is come into an organization and say, work with the stakeholders, supply chain, logistics, whoever that may be, inventory team, and let's look at our forecast. Because yes, we can go back, and I believe we should go back and we should fix what we can. But if we have to do it today, as of today, let's look at our forecast. So moving forward, we can make sure all things are correct. I'll get a forecast. I'll look at all the data, look at all the high runners with regards to value or turnover, and I would start there. Again, is their classification correct? Do we have the origin determination correct? What are the financial impacts? What are the licensing impacts? And if we don't know, we have to ask the question. And again, trade compliance, oftentimes trade compliance professionals overcomplicate things. And I'm not saying that the things are not complicated. They are complicated. But when engaging with other stakeholders, we need to speak a language that they can understand and say, hey, by the way, this is something difficult. It's going to take me a couple of days. I have to cross-reference. I have to speak to our legal team, or I have to speak to a trade professional or trade professionals, or I need to go to this government agency, and it's going to take time. And understanding that Rome wasn't built in a day, and eventually by collaborating together, we can get the answers. And there's no quick path to success.
But yeah, exactly. And then, I think in our mind, having come from even the enforcement world, as long as you're showing the due diligence and you're doing the right thing,
100%.
I think that's also super important.
Yeah, yeah, and I would go with auditing. I'm a big advocate for auditing. Again, if you don't have the data, you might have to do it a little bit more manually, get the papers and pencils out and document it accordingly. But if you have the data, brilliant. Start an audit today. If you have no audit trail, start an audit today and audit things like your classification, like your origin, depending on your region and processes and procedures. Are you using the correct preferential code, the correct procedure code? Do a periodic document check to make sure all your documents are audited. Audit your customs broker. Just because your customs broker is doing something for you doesn't always mean they're doing it right. We are human at the end of the day. Yes, we're all trying to leverage tools that make it more accessible, more easier, more compliant. I'm still finding and still have found, problems with brokerage. And I've been auditing brokerage since I started, 12, 13 years ago. And again, what I always say, it's a partnership. It's not like, no, it's your problem. It's our problem. Let's look in the mirror and see what can we do to set each other up for success.
Absolutely. And what else did we have for Kyle?
I think we've covered most of it. I think, what I've taken away, Kyle, and correct me if I'm wrong or add on, but documentation, fundamentals, preparing for the future, and focused on data. Using the tools that are available and paying attention to the data. Anything else that you wanted to give tips and tricks to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, so those are all definitely very good points. And then again, just to add on to that is the audit piece, right? Auditing is fundamental. And last but not least, we're always leaving money on the table, right? But money should never come at the cost of compliance. And what I have found time and time again, when you're being compliant, you're also saving and mitigating paying a ton of money, right? So sometimes, paying the extra for compliance, there's always a massive cost benefit. And it's normally 10x of what it's going to cost you to be compliant. So sometimes I can understand you're a small business, you don't have all this money to outlay. But if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, something might cost you 10 grand, something might cost you 60 grand, but your return is probably going to be 600 grand or 6 million. So understand that the possibilities that are definitely out there, and there's always money and compliance being left on the table. Compliance, as in you're doing things probably wrong. And because you're doing things wrong, you're also leaving money on the table.
That's a very interesting take in that, if your compliance and your processes are off, there's a chance that holistically as a company, you're not functioning as efficiently.
Correct.
That's a really good insight. Yeah, it's been super having you on, Kyle. I think an extra bonus for me is having fellow Southern African on as
Cheers.
well. More important than trade compliance, Kyle. How are the Springboks going to do next year?
Well, so the Springboks, we have the Championship Rugby. So that's for our listeners that don't know. Not that I'm a rugby fanatic, if you can't tell. It's Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. It used to be called the Tri Nations, but obviously since Argentina joined, it's the Championship. I think we're positioned to do very, very well, positioned to win that again. And then going into the Autumn Nations, that hasn't been announced yet. Confident that we will win that as well. But when you're speaking to a Springbok, South African rugby supporter, we're always very confident. And sometimes people might think it's arrogant, but I believe, in that, in being wholehearted supported in your team and understanding that, hey, look, they might have lost, but we still support them. And even if they had lost, we'd probably still say we should have won. Right. So
Yeah.
so it's just one of those things. But very very fortunate to call myself South African and have such an amazing team of diverse individuals that just continues on that mantra, I guess, that no matter where you're from, no matter how big or small you may be, career, physically, that working together has a profound effect. Putting
Absolutely.
aside your differences is all that it takes for you to be successful.
I love the analogy back to our careers. That's fantastic. Just be careful of wearing that Springbok shirt in Ireland sometimes. I heard it's a bit of a hazard.
Yeah, I wear it all the time.
But I think that's all we had. And Kyle, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure having you on board. I hope we can stay in touch and keep hearing from you. For wonderful insights. Really appreciate your time with us.
Yeah, thank you guys very much for inviting me and taking the time out of your day, and looking forward to continuing our partnership together.
Great. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Bite Pod. We hope you enjoyed exploring all of these great insights today, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Ciao, guys. Bye bye.